Hello and welcome to those who are new to our webinar today, and welcome back to our regulars. I'm Sophie Lewis, Marketing Executive at Equite, and today Jason Parks and Pat Webb are presenting part 2 of our margin improvement series. They'll be presenting for about 20 to 25 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. If you have any questions, you can use the control panel on the right-hand side of the screen, and you'll find the questions box towards the bottom. Over to you two.
Thanks, Sophie. Well, last time we said that if you're not putting margins at the center of your business thinking, then you're not building equity value in the firm, which you could unlock at a later time. So this time, we wanted it to be much more specific and focus on what you actually need to do in order to increase margins in a sustainable way. So in our first webinar on the subject, we concluded that there were 4 steps that should be taken to improve profitability. Create a baseline, set your targets, increase revenue, reduce delivery costs, and optimize overheads. So Jason, can you start with the specifics on creating a baseline and setting targets?
Yeah, sure thing, Pat. So the levers that need to be pulled to improve margin are pretty well understood, revenue and cost. But the combination of activities required underneath that are often pretty nuanced. Ultimately, low consulting margins are the result of failures across a variety of root causes, which will need to be addressed both tactically and strategically to create sustainable margin improvement. We would therefore recommend that firms grab this by the scruff of the neck and do the work properly by setting up a margin improvement project. You simply can't afford to just hope you get it right and that it gets done on its own. A significant improvement may be required, and this really isn't the same as mere incremental improvement. So to make sure you get really good gains, set up a project with a clear charter. Those of you listening with project management capabilities know that part of the value of the charter is to empower the project manager and confirm the objectives, timescales, and accountabilities so that everyone involved knows why they're doing the work and the benefit it will deliver. The charter needn't be something very heavy, overly heavy. Some examples of what should be in there at a minimum, though, the objective, for example, to increase gross margin to 50%, the time scale, within this current fiscal year, the accountability or who owns the project itself. It's typically going to be the financial director or the CFO, and then the empowered team working with that project manager directly. It's typically going to be the sales leaders and the delivery leaders. So, once the charter has been signed off, the next step is to establish the baseline measures. And we recommend you start by measuring project margins. This may not be easy if you don't have an efficient system to track how consultants spend their time, or if there's insufficient discipline in adhering to those systems and processes. So you really need to fix those problems first. The analysis of projects often reveal issues related to clients and services. Some clients and or some services may simply not be profitable for you currently. You really need to find those out. Your operating model should tell you what level of utilization you need for each grade, given the cost that you have and the margins you want to achieve. Utilization is one of the most critical variables for achieving target margins with any consultancy, and it really needs to be measured carefully. And setting targets at the start of the margin improvement project, you need to set a target for gross margin. 50% is good for most consultancies. In terms of targets for utilization, it's common for consultancies to be able to make good profits with utilization of delivery resources above 70%. Any other targets like blended day rates, those will emerge from the analysis that you do. Moving on, establishing the reporting process. In terms of establishing a reporting process for your margin improvement project, and given its importance in driving equity value for the shareholders, the project leaders really should report into the CEO or CFO. And lastly, you'll be dealing with some very sensitive issues here, including measuring people's time, fee rates for clients, and so on. And change may be difficult to achieve. Therefore, you need to explain to the company the value of this project with the emphasis of what's in it for them in order to ensure that they're on board and the team is motivated.
Okay, so now that the project's been set up, let's have a look at what you need to tackle first. Increasing revenue. Well, start with articulating your unique value proposition. The more you're able to describe the benefit you deliver to your client, the easier it becomes to charge higher fees. So articulating the value proposition, the problems you solve, how you solve them, and especially the benefits you deliver, deserves a very serious investment of your time. When we facilitate this work with clients, it typically takes 4 to 6 weeks. So within your project plan, allocate time for this. Define the trends and hot topics in your target sector. Define your competitors' offerings. And we are strong advocates for creating a 10-page pitch, a 6-page pitch, a short pitch that describes who you are and what you're great at, who you work for, what are the problems your clients face, how do you solve those problems, what are the benefits you deliver, and what your clients say about why they use you. And once you've created a pitch like this, test it internally, and as soon as you're happy with it, test it with some existing clients and start to use it in real sales meetings. A good value proposition should be used to inform your marketing collateral, including your website, campaigns, publications, and so on. The next step is to have a look at your pricing, which should be at or slightly above market rates. Once you have a fabulous, compelling value proposition that clearly articulates you and describes the benefits of your services, it becomes much easier to put up your prices. In fact, sometimes our clients find they can just increase their prices without changing their proposition, but obviously that's more difficult and it might be worth a shot. A good value proposition will enable you to price jobs on value rather than on time and materials, and this avoids exposing your rates and could be a good way of effectively increasing your revenue. If you're really confident in the financial benefit your clients will obtain from your intervention, then you can even put some of your fees at risk, if you like, and make them contingent on delivering measurable benefit. To be frank, only a small proportion of consultancies do this, not least because it's risky, and also because their clients can see that they'll end up with a bigger bill if the benefits are really delivered. We've a client in the UK who regularly describes the multi-million-pound savings they deliver to their clients. They do detailed infrastructure consultancy, and it's paid on a fixed fee basis rather than this contingent model, because it would generate invoices that would be just too large for their clients to swallow. However, if you don't end up with contingent fees, the fact that you can describe your services that way will make the proposition compelling. And that's exactly how this client I'm describing, how they operate. The next area to look at is loss-making services. Now, nobody likes turning down revenue, but you might need to do some pruning of your services. Analyze your margins that you make on service lines as well as individual projects. Over time, margins reduce as innovative competitors enter the market, disrupted and capture market share via new tools, offerings, and perspectives. If you're not prepared to kill off commodity offerings, however emotionally attached to them that you are, your margins will, these margins will drag your performance down. David Ogilvy of Ogilvy and Mather, he uses a metaphor of a boat as the business and says that in order for the boat to run at maximum efficiency, you have to keep scraping the barnacles off the bottom. Focus your marketing on getting great leads. Well, it's the marketing team's job to deliver great leads, which means you need to be clear about who you're targeting and ensure you have a compelling message for them. One of the most common failures in marketing is to give up too soon. Depending on the research, it can take between 6 to 8 touches just to generate a viable sales lead. So marketing campaigns can't be start-stop to be effective. 1 or 2 email blasts aren't enough. So plan your campaigns to include the number of touches necessary to convert. Managing the bid process. Well, I think most of you know that little story about the sales manager and the delivery manager who went bear hunting. You know, the one about when the delivery manager stayed in the cabin and the sales manager went out looking for a bear, and he found a very big bear. He shot it, but he only wounded it. And the enraged bear charged towards the sales manager, who started legging it, running for the cabin as fast as he could. And just as he reached the cabin, the open cabin door, the sales manager tripped, fell flat in his face, too close behind him to stop. The bear jumped over him and went rolling into the cabin. And the sales manager jumped up, closed the cabin door, and yelled to his friend inside, "You skin that one while I go and get another." Well, the moral of that little story, of course, is that sales and delivery people need to be involved in the bid process together in order to set yourselves up to succeed rather than to fail. Early on in the process, you need to know how much, just exactly how much it's going to cost you to deliver the solution to your client, and price the job in order to produce your target margins. So we've talked about setting up the project and increasing revenue. Jason, could you now cover the next element required to reduce delivery costs?
Sure thing, Pat. So, we talked in our first webinar on this subject about how difficult senior consultants find it to actually let go of delivery work. But if you're going to drive up margins, this really is an essential step. You simply can't make good margins unless you find a way to get lower cost resources to deliver as much of your work as possible. Many consultancies actually work on the very opposite basis, but this is a real barrier to creating equity value. The first step then is to make sure that your project managers plan the optimum level of resources in the beginning when they're planning the project, and that they do this knowing what level of margin they need to achieve. Incentivizing them on margin delivery as opposed to, say, revenue may actually help here. And while we're on the subject of incentives, if senior people are rewarded on their own billable utilization, it's really little wonder that they don't want to get lower cost resources involved, right? A plausible objection to using more junior resource might be that they don't have the experience or expertise. Well, we wouldn't recommend simply throwing anybody into the deep end without any help. But it is often the case that junior consultants are a lot more savvy and capable than their senior colleagues give them credit for. So, however, to fix this, to really fix this, is twofold, right? One is make sure that you recruit, induct, and develop exceptionally talented people so that they can step up to the mark quickly and deliver great quality work as soon as possible. And second, codify your methodologies, create templates, define the way that you solve your clients' problems, and invest time in training your junior staff. Creating delivery IP in this way not only enables you to increase your margins, but it makes you a much more attractive proposition for a potential future acquirer. Moving on to QA, of course, you can't risk messing up a project and delivering poor quality work to your clients. So you need to make sure you have a quality assurance process in place that ensures you deliver the client's requirements. Part of this process we have already described with methodologies, templates, and trainings, all of which make it much more difficult for jobs to actually go wrong. As well as doing this, you should be using your senior resources to assure delivery quality rather than doing all of the delivery themselves. They have the experience and knowledge to spot the risks in an engagement and to put actions in place before mistakes are made. All of this makes it easier to deliver work with a better balance of juniors and seniors, but there's really an additional benefit, and that's good quality assurance of your delivery processes means that engagements can be completed more quickly and therefore more cheaply, at least because there won't be any rework required. For managing utilization, we talked earlier about having a target for billable utilization across the consultant team. And I'm sure you're probably now thinking a simple target of, say, 70 to 80% for everyone may be too crude. And you'd be right on with that. The more senior members of the team should have a relatively lower utilization target so that they make room for juniors on the delivery team. And then just as importantly, that they invest time in account management, business development, and IP creation. So test these targets in your operating model. Make sure that they'll deliver your target margins and manage to those targets. You won't be able to afford to have poorly utilized people in the business for too long. And conversely, if levels of utilization are too high for too long, you won't get the best out of your team, and some of the better people will eventually leave. So measure utilization accurately, manage it carefully. Subcontractors, many consultancies have quite a timid relationship with their subcontractors and operate well below 50%. But generally speaking, the firm, not the contractor, they carry all the risk of sales and the reputational risk if things go wrong. And that's a huge burden. So paying contractors no more than half the fees that you charge for their time is perfectly reasonable. We'd recommend making this standard practice, so have a line on your improvement plan to achieve it. One note, if you only use very specialist subcontractors very occasionally, you may not be able to get such high margins, but if it's only an occasional use, so you won't have that much impact anyways. And lastly, balancing capacity with demand. The larger the firm grows, the more sophisticated you need to become to make sure you don't lose margin by having too many underutilized resources on the bench, or lose revenue by having too few. This becomes easier to get right if you sell a higher proportion of long-term programs of work. But there will always be some uncertainty. Our 3 tips here are, one, make a member of the senior management team responsible for resource planning, both long-term and short-term. The second tip would be to incorporate a review of capacity and demand into the monthly senior management meetings. We often referred to as sales and operations planning, S&OP. And 3, aim to run the business with overall capacity just under demand. This means that you maintain good levels of utilization and therefore margin, and you can fill the shortfall judiciously with the use of subcontractors.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So now let's look at the final element, optimizing overheads. We mentioned in our previous webinar that it's not uncommon for consultancies to underinvest in some aspects of the business, especially marketing and IP development, which are crucial for growing revenue and reducing costs, respectively, as we've demonstrated. And earlier, we suggested a gross margin target of 50%. If you set a target of 30% for overheads, you should have enough to drive growth and to deliver a healthy 20% EBITDA. In your margin improvement project, you need to set aside some time to carefully analyze overhead spend. And we'd recommend that you break the spend down into 3 key areas of sales and marketing, management, and sustaining the business. Then go through each area and ask yourself, are we getting value for money for this service that we're buying? For example, on IT support, financial support, marketing agency, how do the fees that we pay compare with market benchmarks? Is there any room for negotiating lower rates without compromising quality? Are we spending too much on office space? Do we even need this many offices? Do they need to be this big, this expensive? Can we negotiate lower rates? Secondly, have a look at salaries and compare how they are with the market. Are some people being overpaid for what they deliver? Thirdly, ask yourself, could we reduce overheads by bringing some services in-house or indeed by outsourcing others? You know, many consultancies don't pay enough attention to the basics of cost control. They prefer to focus on client-facing work and muddling through with a DIY approach to important functions like finance, marketing, and talent management. And the bigger the firm, the more this is a false economy, not just because it will constrain your growth, but because the best efforts of enthusiastic amateurs in those areas are rarely as cost-effective as those of well-qualified, highly capable professionals. Now, Sophie, I noticed that while we've been talking, there's quite a number of questions come in. So could you help us, can I just, guide our way through those?
Yep. So I think the first one probably suit Jason. It's our sales leaders are all about closing the deal and trying to increase the size of the deal. But delivery staff are often challenged to translate that into expected profits. Can you comment on that, Jason?
Sure. So, when we look at the root causes of problems with margins, it's often the lack of collaboration between sales and delivery. We commonly find that this lack of collaboration can result in delivery managers discovering deals aren't scoped properly or the wrong skill sets were assigned. So, it's important that delivery managers have early visibility of the pipeline to get resources lined up for the right client at the right rates. That can happen only if there's collaboration and with both sales and delivery having access to the same information. So, this is part of the purpose of having the sales and operation planning process that I talked about earlier.
Okay, thanks for that, Jason. Let's find one for Pat. So we've got one here. They ask, we find it difficult to measure direct benefits. So how could we strengthen our UVP to drive more revenue?
Oh, this is a great question. This comes up over and over and over. If you can't define the value of it, it's very difficult to sell it and therefore drive up revenue. So lots of firms revert to talking about the proposition, what they do, not the benefits. They talk about the shovel and not the hole. So, what to do? Well, the first thought, focus on very specific market niches, specific jobs, specific pain points that lots of people have and that they're going to pay a lot of money to resolve. So how do we do that? Well, let me try and break that down. The first thing is that services create value only in relation with a specific customer segment. So do some secondary research to find out about 3 hot topics and trends affecting your specific customer segment. Next, have a look, do an analysis of your competitive landscape in your chosen niche. You might be the Hilton equivalent in your market, so don't just look and see what Marriott are doing. Have a look too for an Airbnb. Then the next step would be to do some primary research. So in other words, interview your existing clients to find out exactly what the pain points were which your services relieved. And the last tip here is to make sure that in one aspect of your service, maybe some unique combination of your IP, your methodologies, your consultants, the industry focus that you have to be able to differentiate yourself by outperforming your competition.
Thanks for that, Pat. So question 3, let's take, this one. You mentioned that it's important to scrape the barnacles from the bottom of the boat. Can you say more about selecting and dropping service lines? I think Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we recommend that you review your service portfolio annually. Is the bottom line, right? There's a lot of innovation required to stay competitive in consulting. So, make it a point to review the competitive landscape and evaluate your services and offerings as part of your annual business planning process. You want a balanced service portfolio of cash cows and rising stars. Prioritize the opportunities and kill your commodity offerings if the low profitability can't be fixed or remediated through more efficient staffing. And, just on that note, although the question was about scraping the barnacles, I do just want to underline the point that it's equally as important to invest in new, higher value services.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Here's another one. So this person says, our sales leaders are responsible for driving revenue, but they also have utilization delivery targets. Would you recommend that approach, and what should their utilization targets be?
I have a feeling this one's coming my way, right, Sophie? I'm back and forth. So I'm gonna jump in here. Well, if you think of the professional firm pyramid with the practice leaders at the top, they should be accountable for revenue, but also profitability, client satisfaction, and skill building. This is a bit of a hobby horse of mine. Given that mix of accountabilities, it wouldn't be uncommon to find utilization targets around 20 to 30% delivery targets for practice leaders. So the remaining 70 to 80%, what's the practice leader doing? Well, they're contributing to the firm's margin improvement goals. Professional services firms sell skill. So the more skill, the more money. Practice leaders really should be driving efforts to speed up the skill building process. There needs to be an effective learning and development process. And because you really have to bear in mind, the questioner, or Sophie, you have to bear in mind that leaders, practice leaders are competing in two markets, the one for clients and also the one for talent, and that one's getting very competitive. The other thing that practice leaders need to be looking at when they're not billing is the engagement management process has a big impact on profitability. So practice leaders need to make sure that each engagement has been appropriately staffed and there's appropriate delegation, because that's a big drag on margin.
Okay, thanks for that, Pat. I'm a bit conscious on time, so I think we'll leave it there for today. For those of you who we haven't got to your questions, Pat or Jason will get back to you personally. I just wanted to mention, if you'd like to discuss any part of the webinar, my email address is sophie.lewis@equitech.com. And if you're not already a member, then please join our Equitech Edge Club. You'll find expert guidance, articles, our unique research, all our publications. You can also find part 1 of this webinar series on our YouTube channel or on our webinar page on our website. Next month, we'll be running from next week a webinar week based on the findings of our new global consulting M&A report that is released tomorrow. I believe most of you are on our mailing list, so you'll be hearing from us. If you're not, you'll be able to find the latest report and all the webinar details on our website. I just want to say thanks to Jason and Pat for today's webinar, and a recording will be up within 24 hours and emailed to you. So thanks, everybody.